Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Seen from afar, it's an industrial city, full of friendly, hard-working Midwestern folk, sitting comfortably on the southeastern shore of Lake Michigan. But a closer look reveals a city that is really a great patchwork quilt, the sum of many small ethnic areas. Neighborhoods developed by immigrant families who came to America seeking a new life. The early part of the 20th century was a time of prosperity for Milwaukee. In 1916, Daniel Hone was elected mayor. That election cemented the role of socialism in Milwaukee's local government, which had begun a decade earlier with Mayor Emil Seidel. The influx of working immigrants, Poles, Italians, Sicilians, Greeks, Serbians, made Milwaukee one of the nation's most foreign cities. The traditions and influence of the German community flourished and were heavily reflected in the newspapers, architecture, and language. Some even called the city the Munich of the Midwest. Milwaukee was known for its safety and cleanliness, well-kept homes spread out on the rigid street grids, huddled near bustling commercial strips of mom-and-pop stores. Neighborhood residents spoke their native tongue and read foreign-language newspapers. As America entered the 1920s, Milwaukee was a microcosm of European life and culture. In this program, Milwaukeeans share their stories of life in the prosperous 1920s and during the hard times of the 1930s. Stories of work, of play, of everyday life. Impressions of a time they may not always long for, but certainly learned from. Milwaukee between the wars, an era of speakeasies and bathtub gin, when kids got their first glimpse of Santa and the Schuster's Christmas parade, and the streetcar bent the corner round. Milwaukee between the wars, when the old neighborhood was the center of life.
I was born on the south side of Milwaukee, in the 2500 block of South 7th Street, in the shadow of the Basilica Duomo that dominated our life. The church was the center of activity in the community at that time. The people in the area were all Polish at that time. See, they had the Polish community, the German community, had the Italian community, Jewish community. Everybody seemed to be in a sort of a group to live together. So you knew one another, same background, same religion, same educational background, same financial backgrounds.
Mitchell Street played a key role as the South Side's downtown. Its primary customers were Polish Americans. Their low-rise neighborhood was dominated by Polish flats, corner stores, and taverns, and an abundance of church steeples.
Mitchell Street also had a lot of variety. It was exciting to go down Mitchell Street. Coleman Bakery, it was worth it just to go in there. You didn't have to buy anything and you'd feel uplifted because you were in there. And then Gillette's had a sausage shop, and the aroma of the sausage was unbelievable. And then you'd go up a little further and you got to Hill's department store. Goldman's is operating, that was in the same block but on the west corner, and Gimbel's on 11th, it used to be Schuster's. You walk toward where they had the perfume, and the beautiful women, every woman there was beautiful. I thought they were movie stars or queens, whatever.
First of all, you didn't have supermarkets or anything like this. So the corner grocery, the corner butcher, the bakery, you did that every day, you went there every day.
My mother gave me about 10 cents. We used to go and get a bag full of rolls, a basket. We used to go with baskets, a basket for rolls and sweet rolls. Schnecks, they call them at that time.
And this Strieski Bakery, which was on 6th and Harrison, they'd start making these ponchkas, they called them, and they were full of this custard and things of that sort. People lined up all the way down a half block down to 7th Street and another full block from Harrison to Cleveland at 10 o'clock in the evening. They'd be in and they'd buy these things, and before they'd get to Mitchell Street, they'd have them all eaten, a dozen of them.
As a little girl, I lived down the south side of Milwaukee in the Polish neighborhood. where every family had at least 6 or 10 children. We used to play out on the street. In the evening, the folks would sit on the front porches, and we would go out in the street and we'd play button, button, who's got the button? But we'd play it in Polish, because we were all Polish people.
Oh yes, it was all Polish, yes. You learned the English, you brought it home, taught your parents.
I went to the St. John Canty School, and in the morning we would have all our lessons in the Polish language, and in the afternoon a repetition of the lessons in the English language. We went to school from 8 until noon and from 1 until 4. And this was every day, and every day you'd go to Mass. And it was a real rough schedule. Then I had a history teacher who just hated anybody whose name ended with ski. And she must have had 15 of us skis in her room.
I was the first credit manager working for Sears, and I made my office at the South Side store. The Polish people were very thrifty, and the mother got the money. I was amazed in taking credit applications to find, let's say, 4 or 5 children all working. The father working, he's getting $22 a week. A daughter's getting 15 and a son 18. All of a sudden they got $175 to $200 a week in income. And that was a lot of money in the 20s. And Mama ran the show.
Bayview was perhaps the most self-contained and independent neighborhood in Milwaukee, with its own shopping districts, churches, employers, parks, and a broad range of ethnic groups. Bayview was practically a small city inside the larger city.
Well, at that time it was the village of Bayview, and now of course it's the city of Milwaukee. I could walk in 12 blocks in any direction and I would know everybody by name, and they knew me too. The area that I lived in was mostly people from the peninsula of Italy. The third ward was mostly people from the Isle of Sicily. They were the Sicilians. And at that particular time, they didn't get along that well, because the Italians would say, they're not Italian, they're Sicilians. And the Sicilians would take offense. And at one time, there was, in fact, where the Club Garibaldi is now, there was a shooting. Some of the fellas from the Third Ward came down and they shot one of the fellas that were down here.
Third Ward, mostly Italian, some Irishmen. We got along with them, you know. And mostly were all Italian down there.
When we would go up there, we were always very careful not to mention where we were from or anything else. So we just left that issue out of the picture.
The bakery, butcher shop, and corner grocer played an important role in every neighborhood. In Bayview, Groppy's Food Market provided more than groceries.
Groppy's like a meeting place. All of the Italians in the area would go to Groppy's to shop and to converse and to meet with one another. When you bought your meats, it was all fresh cut. And if Mother bought a chicken, she would have to get a live one and then twist it and snap its neck, and then she would tie the feet and hang it in the doorknob so that all of the blood would drip down to the head. The meat would be nice and clean. And then she put on a big pot of boiling water, and that's what I hated, because my sister and I always ended up sitting there plucking the cotton, picking feathers off of it.
The Lower East Side was a neighborhood of contrasts, with castles on the lake bluff, cottages near the river, and ethnic groups in between. Poles were the pioneers, with Italians following. Brady Street was the commercial center for everyone.
It was a noisy place, Brady Street was. There was a firehouse across the street on Franklin Place. The feature of the Brady Street was the streetcar, which roared in both directions past the place at all times. So that night and day there was a racket. My mother, Vernie, and Vernie's candy shop was established in one of these storefronts. And it was a mom and pop enterprise, like most of them were. Of course, I was the candy kid, and I was largely envied for my access to these sweets. And actually, it was a lot of hard work. The simplicity of going to a mom and pop grocery store and buying 10 cents worth of boiled ham, and going to Centix Market and getting some lettuce to feed your rabbits. There was nothing about what happened there that wasn't exciting. Just because I suppose you were young.
The Merrill Park neighborhood was home to many workers employed by the railroads. Its borders included St. Paul Avenue and Clybourne Street between 27th and 35th Street. No other neighborhood can boast that it produced two Milwaukee mayors, brothers Carl and Frank Seidler.
There was Brunke's grocery store, and there's Hugin's Bakery, and there was Stippick's candy store, and there was Shane Labor's, which was a butcher shop. These were small merchants serving a residential area. And of course, the real hangout was the fire station, Engine 28, and that was where the political decisions of the ward were made.
Once a magnet for Russian Jewish families, Walnut Street became the commercial center of Bronzeville, Milwaukee's African-American community. The night spots featured musical acts and floor shows that drew a steady procession of black and white patrons.
A lot of times when the big movie stars would come, like Ethel Waters and Count Basie and Duke Ellington and all people of that era would come to the city, first place they'd want to stop would be at Babe's Restaurant or Claire's Restaurant or Rose's, or go over to 7-Eleven and shoot a little pool and things like that.
Well, there weren't that many minorities here.
But at that time, there was no houses for my people. But eventually, the Jews decided to rent to the Afro-Americans, I would call them.
There was some segregation in jobs, because A.O. Smith didn't hire any minorities until after the war. And also there was discrimination, but we didn't have television at all, and I don't think we were aware of some of the things that were going on.
Linked to Milwaukee by electric streetcar as early as 1891, Wauwatosa became the city's first bedroom suburb. Well-to-do, or at least comfortable, German, Yankee, and Irish residents commuted to work from a community known for its substantial homes and picturesque village center.
Well, now, of course, they call it Tosa, but in those days they called it Tusa. Wauwatosa, that's where we're going. And the poor farm was out there in the county buildings and the insane asylums.
There was a grocery store called the Febers, and there was a general store, and upstairs over it was the city hall.
Lefebvre's had everything, but they had one of those old-fashioned stores where they had a counter and then the revolving seats. You sat down there and somebody waited on you, whatever you needed.
There was an ice cream cone factory down underneath someplace. In those days they had openings in the sidewalk where an elevator would come up and they would put things down into the basement. Well, every so often that elevator would come up and somebody would hand out broken ice cream cones to whatever kids were around. And we tried to be there as often as we could. But
during the 1920s and 1930s, German Americans constituted the most predominant foreign stock of Milwaukee's population. Earlier dreams to make Milwaukee the Munich of the Midwest were forgotten with the onset of World War I. The conflict changed attitudes toward German culture forever.
See, my dad came in about 1900, and he served in the German army, because at that time there was no Poland. It was all divided, and he served in the army under Kaiser. And my mother had a picture of him in a German uniform. And during the First World War, that was the Germans were, kaboo. So my mother took a crane and covered up his uniform.
We never thought we were German. We just think we're American.
German was verboten, and sauerkraut became Liberty cabbage. The Deutscher Club became the Wisconsin Club. The Brumder family, who owned the building in which they printed their German paper, was changed to the Brumder building.
My mother and father spoke German, but in that day with the wars, you didn't even want to say that you knew German. So they never spoke German to me.
in our neighborhood there, and probably all over Milwaukee, were bringing any German music, Bach, Beethoven, well, any of the German composers, and sheet music, books, dumping them in the gutters and burning them. It was again, so against Germany. And of course, my mother, all her folks were born in Germany. So she was so torn. It was an awful time in Milwaukee for those who were German.
European politics also affected the Greek community. Those backing a democracy in Greece lived in separate neighborhoods from those favoring royalty rule.
There were two actually in Milwaukee, the one on the east side and then one on the south side. Most of us who were on the east side, our parents were for democracy. And it was very strange, but here in America, although they were here, they still cling to what was happening in Greece. And in the early days, we only had one church at 1300 North Broadway. It no longer exists there. And then they had another little church on 5th Street.
But this small Greek community in our area here had to go, most of them went to 5th and Cherry. And the Greek school, of course, was around the corner.
I can remember going to Greek school during the week after our American school to learn the Greek language.
By 4 o'clock, we had to go to a storefront around the corner, again near 5th and National, and stay there for 2 hours and learn the history, geography, and the language of Greece.
Nobody thought a thing about it. We went because we were told to go.
Church steeples punctuated the Milwaukee skyline, evidence of the important role the parish played in every neighborhood.
Church became really the center of our sociability. My mother and father, first of all, went to German church when I was real little. And then I remember sitting with my folks in church and my mother'd say, well, listen, he might speak something in English now. And so they finally decided maybe they better go to a church where they spoke English.
After school, we used to go, there's a Polish church on 11th and Hayes. We used to go there and, take catechism and learn to speak Polish.
The Immaculate Conception Church was considered an Irish church. They had a pastor named Father Fagan. He refused to allow us to go, any Italians, to go to his church. So right across the street from Gruppy's, there was a shoe repair shop. Now, no, it's a beauty shop now. Before there was shoe repair, but that building was empty. And a priest would come down from the 3rd Ward on Sunday mornings and say Mass for the Italians in the neighborhood.
Schools were, I believe, a little bit different. They had more discipline in those days, and we accepted it.
I went to school at Cass Street School, which was at Cass and Kewanee. It was practically on the borderline between the Italian and the Polish ethnic communities. The students there were bilingual in the sense that they Italian was spoken at home. So my trip through Cass Street School was a cinch because I had this advantage. I already had a better command of English.
For 2 years, I had to go to Cudahy to school, to the Holy Family School in Cudahy. We would walk 3 miles to school. And this was in farm country, open fields. It was terrible. It was very, very cold.
And in winter, when it was really nice and snowy and that, there were no hot lunches at night. You'd carry your lunch. By the time you got to school, it was frozen. So then the teacher would stick it on the radiators, and by the time you went to eat it, it not only was thawed out, it was half cooked, and the bread was nice and soggy. And
I went to what is now UWM. At that time, it was State Teachers College. And I became a teacher. My first college tuition was $15.
And then I went to school out there at the Milwaukee County Agricultural School, and they had a 4-year high school course, and the boys had to study agriculture and the girls studied domestic economy in those days. And you had no choice. That was it. And But I wanted to take mechanical drawing, and the principal said, "Oh, girls don't do that. We don't have that. You have to raise chickens." I said, "Chickens? I'll never in my life raise chickens." I had to raise chickens, but I never did get to do mechanical drawing, except when I was through high school and I studied architectural drafting at MAT, what's now MATC, was a continuation school in those days. And my teacher said, "You have a job, you're earning money. This is Depression years. I can't even get a job for my men, who are my men students." So I gave it up.
Well, we just had a board, and you'd rub the clothes and rinse it and boil it. Grandma Jones always did that. Everything had to get boiled because it had to be pure white.
My sister would scrub the whites, I would scrub the colors. My dad made me 3 little steps so I could reach the scrub board. And then the two of us would take the boiled whites with sticks and bring them over to the... I'm surprised we didn't get burned at times when I think about some of that stuff that we did. And one time I did catch my sister's finger in the old-fashioned wringer. I had to quick bring it back. I got the tips of her finger in there. In those days, you know, that you had those coal stoves, and you had to polish them, and it was like a shoe polish that you had to polish them with and scrub them down and that. And all your floors were softwood, so you scrubbed them on your hands and knees, and if there was a stain you couldn't get out, they used to put lye on there, and then you would scrub with lye, and you couldn't leave the house until your chores were done. When Dad went hunting, I was the guy that had to hold the legs while he stripped the fur off and that. You'd put the meat in a cloth bag and you'd hang it on the wash line, hang it outside, and it would freeze. And it was frozen until you needed it. We didn't have freezers in that, and that was just a normal life, that you just did it.
Oh, we played ball, or else we played horseshoe, or the top. They used to have a lot of stuff for us. The only park was the Juneau Park. You had to go up by the lake to Juneau Park.
I got my first bicycle when I was about 8 years of age. You know, you could travel around in the area. We had, the streets were paved, but they were paved, Clyburn Street was paved with cedar blocks. Very nice kind of a pavement. And then there were a lot of open spaces where you could play ball on vacant lots. Although frequently we played ball right on the street. There weren't that many automobiles.
When we heard an airplane in the sky, everybody ran out their front door to see if they could see that airplane, because that was really something to look up in the sky and see an airplane.
One of the things that we had was like the taffy pulls, which the kids don't know about today, and they're missing a lot. They really are.
The only thing that we really were interested in is having fun. I mean, the sensations poured in, the smells, the sights, the incredible welling feeling of anticipation on simply going on a hike down as far as Capitol Drive and roasting some weenies.
Playground closed at 9 o'clock, and we would all hold hands and sing the old song, you know, now run along home and jump into bed, say your prayers, but don't cover your head. The very same thing I'll say unto you, you dream of me and I'll dream of you, and then everybody took off.
Then we used to go watch baseball games, you know, like at the Simmons Field on Saturdays and Sundays. We used to go and watch the games. In fact, I was selling ice cream for one of the vendors there, you know. You have a box with cones and sell around and sell that, and just for a couple pennies, but you know, that time those pennies meant a lot.
Baseball, of course, was the main sport. You'd go to the Borchard Field, which was near here over on 8th and Chambers.
They also had, not Little League, but the American Legion baseball, and county parks had major, minor, and triple, AA, AAA leagues, and you participated in that.
There was a great emphasis on track as the sports, more so than football. One of the things that they had in the 20s that you don't have now was sulky racing. They'd have sulky racing at the state fairgrounds, and they had sulky racing at Washington Park.
At that time, the zoo was there, and there was no charge, and you could spend an enjoyable day watching the animals, having lunch, sharing it with your neighbors and friends.
When we lived on Wisconsin Avenue across from, was across the valley from the zoo. If the wind was from the north, we could hear the lions roar.
A family outing, of course, would be a picnic, and we had quite a few of the picnics.
We would fix lunch and go out to Washington Park. That was the main park. And the children would play games, you know, and play ball.
The women all packed their lunches and in bushel baskets. And we boarded the streetcar on North Water and Juneau Avenue. And that alone, that we were able to ride a streetcar, would cost a nickel. And that nickel was something when some of them had 5 or 6 children. So it was a great day.
In wintertime, where we would skate would be at Washington Park. We had a pavilion there if your feet got cold, and you'd have Ivor Johnson skates or Nestor Johnson skates. Then you were really good.
We went to ice skate at Cuzzy Park, Kosciuszko Park. Well, they charged a nickel if you could afford it and you wanted to check your shoes. What we did was we tie the laces together and throw them over a branch in the tree. And then we had to get up and down the tree. Now you tried to get them as high as you could because the kids would steal them. They were cold when they put them on, but that's how you checked your shoes.
Or you could skate on the Milwaukee River, south of Locust Street Bridge. There were all kinds of ice rinks all over the city. And as kids, you built snow forts and snowmen and so on. There's a certain amount of snowball throwing.
In summer, we would take the streetcar and go down to the river, to the Milwaukee River. And at the North Avenue Dam, there were 2 swimming schools. There was Roan's on one side and Beckstein's on the other side of the river. And we'd take our streetcar and go down to the river to learn how to swim.
We would go down to South Shore Beach, and we'd bring picnic lunches, and then you'd go up under the trees and have your picnic lunch, and you'd go swimming again. You spent, my kid brother and I, my brother Pete and I spent a lot of time down there.
We used to walk down to Gordon Park and go swimming in the river. We'd put on we called them water wings. They were white. We'd blow them up and put them on, and we went to Bradford Beach, and the water was always very cold.
And sometimes we'd go to an auditorium and go swimming. There was one on East Center Street.
Men would go certain days and ladies and girls another day. They'd have a real big room where you would undress and get into your suit, shower and swim.
You could live on McKinley Beach with 1 hot dog and 1 bottle of grape pop, which was a total expenditure of a dime. There was a bathhouse at McKinley Beach. In order to get out of there, you had to go through a spray that came from both sides with sprayed ice water. I don't know why it had to be so cold. And then onto sand so burning hot that your feet wouldn't stand it. And then you could swim out to the diving board, and then you could climb up on the diving board until you got dry and warm enough to make it a dreadful proposition to get back in cold water and come back to shore. But you ran up onto the sand and you scraped away the hot stuff, and you found a little damp, and you put your behind on that, shivering with cold and turning blue actually, until the sort of a chill passed, and then bang, back into the water again, all day long. And in the evening, it was time to go back home, and you'd walk up Brady Street with that western sun shining right in your eyes, just blazing at you. And there was Mother. She was sitting back in the candy store on an upended chocolate crate with her hands in her lap, and pretty soon she would be frying some round steak and making some potato pancakes, and we were nourished again.
Milwaukee's breweries were struck a lethal blow in 1920 when Prohibition took effect. But in a city where beer production was one of the largest industries and beer consumption one of the most enjoyed pastimes, Milwaukee did not dry up.
There's a place, we go out on Brown Deer Road, we go past a Land and Stone house, it's called the Speakeasy, and that was a speakeasy in those days. It was a house way back in the woods because the road was way far away. We used to go there, and they'd always say, Joe sent you. You would knock on the door, they didn't care who sent you. Just if you looked that you were not an agent of the government, they'd let you in. And oh, you got some awful stuff to drink, but you drank it.
Breweries converted to the production of near beer, and remaining taverns sold it. Some breweries found other products to manufacture.
The Schlitz Brewing Company, was practically put out of business except for making non-alcoholic beers. I don't think they ever made soft drinks the way Pabst did. So Eline went into making chocolate. They made a very fine chocolate called Eline's, E-L-I-N-E, although their name is U-I-H-L-E-I-N.
Taverns used to sell this near beer. Don't ask me how it tastes because I was too young to drink then. Because I remember when we lived on 10th Avenue, my dad, when he came home from work and we worked in a foundry, you have one of those pails, with a cover. You should go up there for a nickel, you get a pail of beer.
How clever my dad and the other people were. They'd line it up with lard so you wouldn't get any foam. See, it would just disappear. So you'd have all foam, all beer and no foam. Clever.
They'd buy near beer and then they'd put alcohol in the top, and I don't think any of the ladies drank those days. I think the fellas did.
In the family, you always have black sheep. One of them used to run molten hops across the border, Illinois. Well, I hope the statute of limitations has run out.
My father went to the pharmacy on the corner there, and he made his own gin. The men all made their own gin.
At that time, my dad used to make moonshine. And I had to go and buy the sugar. But he only made it for his own use. He did not sell it.
My dad used to make wine all the time. 2 big barrels of wine, one white and one red. And I used to help him with the grapes. See? And he never got drunk, he got juices. I used to drink it when I ate, but after that it was too dry. I didn't like it.
I personally took a lot of that grape wine, being a boy chemist, and I distilled it, made a delicious brandy. And there was an item called Gower's Banana Schnapps, which was very popular, though I suppose illegal, for which I got $1. And I thought I made a rather good living at that sort of thing.
When we first had the radio, this is hard to believe, but Chicago would not broadcast on Monday night, so the rest of us could see how far away we could get a station. And we used to get Schenectady, New York, and that had one of the first radio stations.
And we had a little 1-tube set. The tube had a point on it. And it had dry batteries connected to it and earphones. And fortunately, we had 2 sets of earphones. We were listening to that one evening at a Dempsey-Tooney fight, I think. And my father said to me, go down to the corner to the drugstore and get me 2 packs of humps, he said. 2 packs of Camel cigarettes. He smoked more than was good for him, I'm sure. But anyway, I was so resentful at the idea he didn't send my brother Norman. He was always picking on me. And so he gave me the 2 bits, and I jerked away from the table, and I'm going to run back. But he could have, this guy, Dempsey could have clouded this guy one, and I would have missed it all. And so I didn't know it, I didn't realize it, but I had the earphones clamped to my head, and I had another thing connected to me somewhere, and I dragged the whole set off the table, and the radio busted, and it was murder. It was just plain, the future turned absolutely black.
By 1929, there was a very substantial improvement where you had battery radios with 3 dials, and it was very exciting to work those 3 dials to see if you could get Pittsburgh, KDK Pittsburgh, or KYW in Chicago.
My mother went to Sears and bought a radio. Everybody had radios that went on the table. They were long and big. She went to Sears and they were advertising one in a cabinet. Well, her brothers couldn't believe that. Every one of them came. And they were so impressed with this high-legged cabinet and the radio was inside. I think it had doors that closed. And of course you always drilled a hole in your living room floor because that's where the radio was, down to the basement where you had a charger because it was played on batteries. And my grandmother couldn't go up and downstairs anymore, and my brothers used to carry her downstairs because who ever heard of having 2 radios, you know? You had 1 radio and everybody listened to that. 10 o'clock, Amos and Andy came on, and oh, there was the one with the creaking door, the shadow nose. Oh, that was scary. And we of course, when the scary ones came on, we turned out all the lights. We went right along with it.
Shadow nose.
Movies were a great part of your life.
During the late 20s, you got some great motion picture theaters built. There was the Tower Theater, the Oriental, which is still in existence, the Uptown, the Majeska on the south side. These were very fine motion picture houses.
Yeah, we went to the show house. They had a show house, American show house. You go down to Wisconsin and around 3rd Street. They had the Princess there, the American Theater, the White House. But then we used to walk down there, and they had a place where we used to have this Comstock candy. He pulled and had that white candy. We always used to stop there and buy it, and then we go to the theater.
During that time came in the organs in the theaters, wonderful theater organs. And you had organists that could look at a picture and see a fight, and you'd put some music to it, or a chase, put some music to it. Or even if somebody was engaged in using expletives, they could make a sound that would suggest that somebody was using foul language.
And the movie houses were beautiful downtown, Wisconsin, the Palace. And then much later was the Riverside, the Strand. And then the neighborhood movies were pretty too.
There was the Venetian on Center. And that was a fantastic. It really was a beautiful theater in its day. The decorations inside were so Venetian. It was lovely.
The Regal Theater was one of the favorite theaters, between 7th and 8th on Walnut. The Regal was one of the favorite pastime. You find for 20 cents, 25 cents, you see a double feature.
In the south end here, you had the Avalon and you had the Lake Theater. Lincoln Avenue had the Bijou, the Lincoln Theater, the Rivera Theater. It was a nickel a shot if you went there for double features, all that sort of stuff. Tom Mix, Tim McCoy, and all those different cowboy programs.
During the 20s, the first sound came in. I remember seeing my first sound film at the Tower Theater. Before that, it was silent pictures.
And I always swear to this day that the reason our generation could read was because of the silent movies and the subtitles. If you didn't read it out loud, somebody else did. And so you knew what they were saying and you could read the words.
It was the Mirth Theater, and then there was one that was called the Lake Theater on Delaware Avenue. In the summertime, they had free shows. They would hang a sheet outside the old Beulah Britton. And they'd close off St. Clair, and they'd close off Delaware, and so that whole triangle was all closed off, and then everybody'd come running. Oh, even the front seats of the old Model T Fords and they would sit on the ground there and watch, and the guy, Joe May, would play the piano, and we'd watch the movie.
You go in with your brother, and they'd say, you're underage, so you'd go in with him. So he'd pay the nickel, and then you'd get in free. So they'd go in, and they'd say, well, how old are you? Well, I'm 8 years old, or 7, whatever it would be, see. When were you born, see? They told me, you said, you're not, you're 10 years old. You pay the nickel. That was really funny.
The bigger, the more prominent the theater, you knew you were going to see pictures that were made more recently. As they got down to the Midget Theater off of 8th and Mitchell, and that was quite a unique name, calling it the Midget, but what's in the name? And the Park Theater, they got it down at the end, and then they were only 5 and 10 cents. But then you didn't care when they were made. Now we've got to see the latest. But we saw movies that were 3, 4, 5 years old, I suppose. But the Majeska had class. It really did. It was a upscale theater, I suppose you'd use the term. That was reserved for Sundays, where when you saved up an extra nickel.
And of course they'd have these cliffhangers. Come back next week and somebody's about ready to jump off the cliff, and let's see if they do it.
There was a serial that was at the Parkway that was on 33rd and Lisbon. And every Saturday a group of us would walk down to the Parkway because they had the serial. And we had to see if the heroine got off the railroad tracks in time, you know. So every Saturday that was what we did.
And once in a great while, my mother would take me to a movie, and I remember, I think it was only 15 cents or something like that, and then you'd get a free dish. Oh, that was a big thing, free dish. The first time was a big platter, but after that it was maybe a cup, maybe a saucer.
I remember the old Palace Theater on 6th in Wisconsin. We used to go there for movies, and then they would have little wrought iron basket sort of things on the back of the seats, and they had candy in there, and you had to put money in it, and you could get the candy out to eat.
The one I think of most was the Palace, and it was no longer there, but it was on the corner of 6th Street and Wisconsin Avenue on the east corner. They had shows on the stage with a movie. Vaudeville shows, and we saw some well-known actresses and actors that that traveled around and did their shows. And then the Wisconsin was built across the street, where it's now a parking lot, I think.
And we used to go to vaudeville. There was a Miller Theater on 3rd Street, just north of Wisconsin Avenue. That was quite a vaudeville house. So was the Palace. You know. And then down the street was a burlesque house, which I never got into.
Carnival fun could be found outside the city by taking an interurban train to one of the amusement parks on nearby inland lakes.
There was Waukesha Beach. Well, that was out on Pewaukee, was it Pewaukee Lake? And that was a regular carnival type thing, you know, with all the rides and everything. And
now you had an amusement park also down at Muskego Beach. And Muskego Beach, this is all a thing of the past.
And sometimes the fun would come here when circuses and carnivals made their regular trips to Milwaukee.
West of 35th and Clybourne was the town of Wauwatosa. That was not yet in the city of Milwaukee. And there is where you found some of the circuses. Sells Flodo Circus was one of them. And they would pitch their tents there, and they would start a parade with elephants. They'd walk them up to 35th and what is now Kilbourne, then Cedar Street, and walk them to the downtown and come back. It was a long hike.
Milwaukee loves a parade and will find any excuse to stage one. When a visiting dignitary or celebrity arrived, it was customary to greet the guest of honor in style.
Teddy Roosevelt, who was the ex-president at that time, was coming from Chicago via the North Shore Railroad, and he was supposed to get off at 6 in Wisconsin, and instead of getting off the train at 6 in Wisconsin, he stayed right on the train till it came to 2nd in Wisconsin. When he got off the train, we were the only ones in uniform, and he came up to me and he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "Are you the Boy Scouts that are greeting me?" And by this time I could hear sirens of the mayor and the rest of the people coming down Wisconsin Avenue to be there. Interestingly enough, he was built up in the minds of 11, 12, and 13-year-old boys as a real he-man, you know. And here he has a high-pitched voice. It was a real shocker, in a sense. So that's how I met the ex-president.
The big celebrity visit of 1927 was by Charles Lindbergh, who had just won world fame by making the first solo flight across the Atlantic. Lucky Lindy landed at County Airport in his Spirit of St. Louis monoplane. Then he was whisked through the crowd-lined streets downtown so fast that few even caught a glimpse of the blonde boy flyer. Another special celebrity made his annual visit at a more leisurely pace.
Most famous of all, and everybody around knows it, was the Schuster's Christmas Parade with Meetik, the Eskimo. And that was fabulous. We talked about it for months before.
Still had streetcar tracks. And they would take a construction electric car, that is one that was kind of a flat-bottom car, but with a cab on both ends. And they would mount a Billy the Brownie and Santa Claus and the reindeers on that, and then they would ride that all around the city.
Those were live reindeer, and it was quite a sight for city kids. There was something exciting and glamorous, and really brought the spirit of Christmas into your hearts.
And I ain't got a dime to my name.
At the beginning of the Depression, Milwaukee prospered from a backlog of factory orders. It seemed the city would be spared the hardship felt elsewhere. Word had spread that Milwaukee was an island of prosperity in the national sea of misery. Many people migrated here, but once the city also fell on hard times, unemployment soared and a housing shortage developed. Colonies of shacks, dubbed Hoovervilles as a dig at the president, popped up along the upper Milwaukee River and near the Soldiers' Home. But sturdy Milwaukeeans persevered.
Everybody was suffering the same, just about.
It was a great time. It was tough, but it was also you learned a lot. You didn't go out and buy things at that time. You made them if you couldn't, because you couldn't afford them.
It got worse gradually after 1929.
I don't think Milwaukee suffered until about 1930-31, when the industrial level of Milwaukee began not to have any work. And by 1931 or 32, we were down with 30-35% unemployment. That's when we began to feel it.
People ran out of their savings and ran out of their means of support.
We had macaroni and cheese for a couple of Thanksgiving dinners. That was all we could have.
Well, I was out of work for a long time. You know, I got out of high school in 1929. There wasn't any work.
My father lost his job. All my brothers lost their jobs. My brother Al worked just as an office boy for the John Deere Plow Company. And my sister was working in a glove factory. I think she was making $13 a week.
My mother worked. She would go out for cleaning for a whole day for $1 to buy my weekly pass on the streetcar so I could go to school.
A lot of people helped one another And with, for example, they'd have a benefit card party or a bunco party if somebody was sick and they couldn't meet the payments in the hospital or and they were ill. They'd have these parties for them.
There was one very, very poor family. They must have had 10 children at least. And they didn't have anything. They lived in a kind of a rebuilt barn. And my mother felt so sympathetic toward them. We didn't have much ourselves, but she made a pair of mittens for every one of those kids. And we gave that to them for Christmas because we had a Christmas exchange. And they didn't expect anything. They were going to go home right after this, and then they got these things and they just cried. They just were so happy. So it was kind of rough.
Everyone was in the same boat, so we all tried to help each other out. Mrs. McCrae up the street from my house, which is a couple blocks south of Walnut, had a little garden in which I used to jump over the fence and go in there and get rhubarbs.
There'd be a block of employees waiting if there would be any work open. And Dad would get out there and say, "I'm sorry, fellas, but there's no work today. We don't need any additional employees." And when they did, why, you'd have 200 people there for 20 men to be hired, you know, this sort of thing. It was rough, it was tough.
There wasn't this happy rose-covered cottage and the Dad coming home with a newspaper under his arm, ever having worked a while at the office. That was sort of a picture that the movies depicted.
And by the 1930-31, you had outdoor relief. That is, that people were so desperate that the county had to step in and start actually supplying them with commodities.
That was welfare in kind. You didn't get any money. The rent was paid, all the utilities were paid, and they called it the Department of Outdoor Relief because you had to go someplace, and usually they went with a coaster wagon and picked up their groceries.
Because I can remember them with their little wheelbarrows going up to the corner of Potter and Kinnickinnick. There used to be a place there called Oddfellows Hall, and then right on the side of it there was the old A&P store, and that they would be given excess foods and that, canned meats and what have you.
It was mostly flour and sugar and oatmeal and beans and peanut butter and apple butter. To this day, I cannot look apple butter in the face. Ooh, it just nauseates me.
When you could afford it, you went off of welfare. You didn't go there. You leave that for the people who really needed it.
My family had to apply for that at a certain time. I'm not ashamed to say that because my folks were very law-abiding people. And
you didn't want people to know you were on welfare. But except for kids, you know, we didn't know. We thought that was the way to go.
The children would say, "Oh, I see your shoes. You get your shoes from the county. I get my shoes from the county too."
The poor people got so much peanut butter that once in a while some customer would come in and ask us, "Could you give me an exchange for this can of peanut butter?" I'm sure it wasn't allowed, but we did partake in that sort of thing, primarily to help our fellow person with a need because we knew there were children at home.
My dad was one of these guys that had too much pride maybe, but he refused to go on the county, and he was very fortunate that our stores gave him credit during the wintertime. There was 3 stores in the Bayview area. There was Grappi's, there was Cialdini's, and there was Paradise's, and they would allow him to put everything on the books. And I remember Mr. Cialdini, each month when he would go over to make a payment on the account. Now, here this man had given him credit for the whole winter, and when he was going over and paying on the account, he would give us kids candy because Dad was paying on the bill.
Of course, a lot of home foreclosures, and as a result of it, people they'd pay and pay and pay, and then they'd lose their home.
Anybody who had no place to live, was slightly related to us, came to live with us. And that was the way it was. In the Depression years, we had 13 people in our house, 4 generations. So that was a lot of people and a lot of activity.
My grandfather's mother, which would have been my great-grandmother, lived there, plus his brother and his wives. And then in the basement, we had roomers, and then upstairs we had roomers, and we'd do all of that in order to survive.
Everybody suffered from a lack of privacy. For instance, in our home, my Aunt Annie and Sally were both living because they were Ma's sisters, and we had to put up with it. But it was crowded, and there were fights and everything.
We survived, and I really think maybe the better for it. We have a greater appreciation, a greater understanding of things that you can't have, you learn to do without, or you make do.
It was a good life. Good life from the standpoint that we learned from one another in the family as well as from neighbors, because we had no other thought. One of the biggest thought, of course, was to survive.
Oh, I can remember the fruit peddlers going through the streets, and they'd be calling out, "Watermelon, watermelon," and we'd all run out of the house to see what the man had.
We depended on the horse. I didn't, but I mean, commerce depended on it. You could go walk across the street at the City Hall at Wells Street and North Water Street, and you had to watch your footing because of the horses traffic through there. Horse-drawn wagons that squirted the streets, and they washed all the horse stuff and the cigar butts and all that into the sewers.
Then there was the iceman in the summer delivering ice because we didn't have electric refrigeration at that time.
He'd look at the sign in the window, and there's a little card that says 25 or 50, and that was the weight of the block of ice he would bring upstairs, and open the old ice box in the hallway and take out whatever is in there and put in a new block of ice, and that was the only refrigeration available.
But you had to watch the pan underneath, otherwise you'd have a flood. You know, you had to be careful of that.
And sometimes it was difficult to find that extra 10 cents for that chunk of ice that needed to be placed there every third or fourth or fifth day.
We could hear the horse and the milkman coming down the alley, and in the winter the wheels would creak on the snow.
The horse knew how far to go, and he'd stop by itself. You didn't have to say ho or giddy up or anything.
They also had the ragmen that went by, and they'd call rags, rags, and then you sold your rags and your newspapers to them.
These guys had a horse and wagon, and they simply came by hollering in the alleys and the backyards looking for old pieces of iron and old clothes and piles of newspapers, and they made whatever precarious living they could out of it.
The coal was delivered. They used to carry it on their backs and bring it into the house and dumped it in a coal bin.
That's right. And you'd have to bank the furnace every night in winter, and then they'd bring the coal in. These guys, Leszczynski Coal Company was a very famous Southside coal company.
The fire house was an important place because as soon as they had in my memory, they were horse-drawn, and they had a fire going, an eternal flame was going over there because they had to light up that coke fire under the pumper wagon, and then they would have 3 horses, and they would tear out of there and down the street with the kids and dogs barking and the kids yelling, and it was a great spectacle.
Before Milwaukeeans could afford a car, the streetcar was the lifeline of the city, connecting every neighborhood and beyond.
You didn't go around to a place very fast. You had to figure you're either going to get there by walking or by streetcar.
And they were nice riding, fast, and the front coach always had the leather seats for the ladies and children, and the cane seats in the back were for the smokers. But that time the old streetcar conductors would still ring it up on a cash register. You had a rope there, and then the register was up on the wall there, and then they'd pull that cord, and then it showed that it advanced 5 or 7 cents.
In order to save money, instead of taking the regular streetcar, which I think was 10 cents, we used to walk 8 blocks to what they called the Hinky Dinky. It was a little kind of a tunerville trolley type thing. And it would travel, I think, along 6th Street, if I'm not mistaken. And you got on there for a nickel. So we would take the hinky-dinky and we'd go right to the factory, a block away from the factory, and come back, and then we had to walk 8 blocks again. But this was done because you saved that nickel.
There was always a problem with snow because the streetcar had to have special equipment come along with great revolving brushes set at an angle in front of the special streetcar, and it would brush the tracks or even plow them if it got to be really bad. But whenever that happened, the vehicular traffic on Brady Street was at a standstill.
When you took the streetcar, you had to go across the trestle. It was called the Wells Street Viaduct.
People were scared to go over that bridge. You know, the motorman would throw his controller wide open and sail across that bridge, just north of the present Wisconsin Avenue Bridge.
And my mother, who was a Roman Catholic, would always cross herself and pray when we went across that. And when I was taking my children, and I'm not a Roman Catholic, I was very tempted to do the same thing. And that was many years later, but there was never an accident on that.
One chap would get on the streetcar, and we would walk down ahead a block or two, and he would be at the back door giving out his pass, so 2 of us would get on the same pass. It wasn't good to do. We certainly don't recommend that, but there it was. Depression days, we didn't have that extra nickel to get on the streetcar.
There was another streetcar line that came into Wauwatosa when we were children that was called Pabst Avenue line. And Pabst Avenue is now Lloyd Street. And we loved to take that one because that on that streetcar very often went off the track. And that was always exciting because a repair car had to come out and lift up the streetcar, put it back on the track. But you have to take your fun where you get it. And that was it.
The rapid transit trains made it possible for Milwaukeeans to efficiently travel to outlying areas. Fort Washington, Burlington, East Troy, Waukesha.
And I used to like to ride the rapid transit, and I would do that. In the evening, I would go to Sheboygan or Burlington or East Troy, just take a ride. And so I was always wanting to go someplace.
With unemployment at an all-time high, the federal government stepped in. In an attempt to provide work relief to the millions who were unemployed nationwide, FDR's New Deal started a host of new programs. Several local parks were built, and the low-cost housing communities of Park Lawn and Greendale were constructed.
I also worked on the work relief programs, like WPA. WPA was a works program that put people to work. Different, whatever people could do. Artists got work. They did all the construction work, cleaned up parks. They did all sorts of things.
One of my twin brothers went into the CCCs. It was the Civil Conservation Corps. And they sent him north somewhere. They built roads and built different things. And they would get their room and board free, and they would get $30 a month. Well, of that $30, he would send $15 home.
With the private sector paralyzed by the Depression and the federal government controlling the economy, there was a radical reordering of the balance of power between management and labor. The streetcar strike of 1934 was one of the worst to occur in Milwaukee during the 30s, but it certainly wasn't the only one. It is said that no other city in the nation had as many strikes at that time as Milwaukee did.
In the 1930s, there were some very severe strikes in 34 and 1935. The streetcar company strike of 1934 was produced fighting along the streetcar barns.
Alice Chalmers had a big strike in order to be able to unionize. That's what usually the strikes were about. They wanted to unionize and the companies didn't want them to.
Most strikers were fighting for decent working conditions in exchange for their hard labor, a philosophy that grew out of a Milwaukeean's firm belief in an honest day's work.
The feeling was that you, when the sun came up, you had to start working, and you had to keep on doing that till the sun went down. which in summer was a considerable hardship. But the idea was that the work was itself a salvation. There was no other reason for being, except, of course, to have children and to keep up, maintain the family line.
First I worked for Landscape Architects, which was a luxury business and went out of business in the Depression. And then I worked under civil service for the county in the welfare department. When I got that job at the welfare department, I was offered at $100 a month, which was probably the going rate before the Depression. And they never lowered it so far as I know. In fact, we got automatic raises. I did well. I have no complaints I can't complain about the Depression.
Though many women found suitable employment, some lost their jobs when their domestic situation changed.
I worked at the telephone company, and I met Mrs. Newman down there. Back in those days, the telephone company had a strict rule that any girl that got married had to leave the company, and that's what they lived by at that time. There was no union or anything of that sort. So Gert and I kind of postponed our wedding to a certain degree, but finally we did get married.
I was expecting our first child. Well, I was looking a little large, and so I noticed the head of the library, this woman, she would keep me out of sight behind the stacks or in another room where they filed records. And then she told me, she said, now you're going to have to think of quitting, because what must the men in the newsroom think? And I thought, well, most of them are married and they all have children. They know the stork do not bring children. But anyhow, I should think of leaving, and so I did. I had to go home.
This was the day of the family doctor. He usually practiced right out of his home. No health insurance was necessary, and house calls were the norm.
Well, I can remember Dr. Gardetto coming to the house, and we put a sheet on the table and laid my brother on the table, and he removed his tonsils on the kitchen table.
Babies being born now, mothers are out of the hospital before the baby's hardly dry, and I was in the hospital for 7 or 8 days or something. The whole bill was $44. You know, that's a lot of money even in that day, but it was not impossible to pay.
They had what you call a midwife, or a woman came, and when you started in pain, you know, she might stay all day, but it might not happen till the next day. But she was trained to do that kind of work.
I broke my arm one time, bent it in here, and of course I was about to tell my mother that I hurt, and but I finally had to. Well, she got the doctor, he came to the house, he looked at it, and he gave me ether, and I don't remember, but she said he took my arm like a dish rag and did like this and broke all the bones in there. Put them back together, never took an x-ray, and wrapped me up, and so that's what he did.
You didn't even know if you were going to get a bill from him. It was that kind of a family doctor.
FDR was a great liberator because he got rid of the Prohibition era for us.
When Roosevelt in 1932 decided that there would be light wines and beer, that was a cause for great rejoicing.
Oh, was there? And I had to work. But my wife went out with my aunt. They went downtown, and they said they had a heck of a time there. And they lasted all night.
And it was very crowded and lots of people, you know, and hilarity. But some, I'm sure, overdid it.
And everybody celebrated, including Newman.
Well, I don't know, we just went out and drank beer. That was the first thing that was allowed. Yeah, after that, I don't remember about hard liquor when that came back, but I do remember when the beer came. I even remember the tavern we went to on 13th and State.
Augie Pabst was in the hospital with his wife, and I was in the hospital having children, and he came screaming in and said, "No, we can sell beer again."
There was more to celebrate than legal beer. The reopened breweries and taverns put an estimated 8,000 Milwaukeeans back on the payroll during the darkest days of sky-high unemployment.
I was 13 when I first drove a car, but my father was with me, and there weren't many cars on the road.
Toward the end of the 1920s, automobiles came in a great number. And then you found that people were driving a lot of places. And on Sunday, you'd go out on the highways, and as far as you could see, the cars were lined up behind each other.
My sister and I bought a car, nice, fancy little yellow roadster. And everybody, whoever got up first, you know that old saying, first one up, best one dressed? Well, whoever got up first got the car. My father had bought me the cutest new Buick Roadster with a back seat. It was black and red, and it was a fancy car. In the winter, we would go back and forth to Port Washington, where my sister's boyfriends lived, and the people in the back said, we're outside, you put the top down, you're going to be on the outside too. And no heaters, big blankets around you and whatnot, and freezing to death. But we went. But the roads were bad in the wintertime. And then at that time they had rotary plows. They blow the snow way up and over, and you'd be in like a tunnel. In some places you wouldn't know what was behind there, because if it was a big snowstorm. My college roommate was visiting me, and she lived in Denver, and she knew how to drive. So she said, I'll teach you how. And the day we got the car, she got me in the front seat, and we drove all the way downtown, all the way over to Old Milwaukee Hospital. And that's how I learned to drive. And I've driven ever since. And I've never had a driver's license, because you didn't have to in those days. And I've driven since 25.
A time in history is visually defined by style, and clothes had a certain look during this period, from the jazzy flapper fashions of the prosperous 20s to the functional and make-do style of the Depression.
You never went out unless you had a hat and gloves and a purse, high-heeled shoes. Oh, my mother used to wear the pointed shoes and then laced up about that high, and elegant, you know. And white gloves later on, white gloves, oh, I hated those things. My laundry was always bad. I never got anything white. We were no different then than today. Whatever somebody wore, we all wore.
The downtown offered many fine clothing shops and department stores.
One was called Smartwear, and one was called Emma Lange, but there were elegant clothes in that. They were on the east side of the river. And then there were the shoe stores. There was Casper in Vermont. There was a beautiful shoe store. And Peacock shoes. We loved to go to Espenhain's because if you paid for something, they put in a little tube, and then they went up to the office, and they made the change up in the office. Went on a little trolley-like sort of thing, and it was a vacuum. It sort of sucked it up. And how it got down, I don't know, but we were fascinated with that thing. And hat shops. There was one on east of the Pfister Hotel. Oh, it had beautiful hats. And then there was another one on Leet Street. Oh, if you didn't get a hat from there, you just were not dressed properly.
Milwaukee was peculiar to the average metropolitan city. Over 50% of the retail business was done in 3 other shopping areas. 3rd and North, 12th and Bleat, 6th and Mitchell.
Most of our shopping we did was on 3rd Street. There was Lerner's and Bitker-Gerner and few Ed Schuster's.
Bitker-Gerner's and Rosenberg's were on 3rd Street. Upper 3rd Street was a very fashionable shopping center. There was a Schuster's store there, and that was very good.
The major department store in the state of Wisconsin was Schuster's. No downtown location.
Stockings with seams up the back, and they not only had seams up the back, they would have what they call clocks on the side, a little embroidery that came up over the ankle with a little like an arrow or something. Oh, and you had those. You paid money for those. You paid as much as $5 a pair for those stockings, and if you've got a run in them, you cried. And of course you had to garter them, either with a garter from a garter belt or a girdle.
And we didn't have many dresses. When I went to work, I had 3 dresses, and then I had one good dress, or one good suit. And it wasn't a problem of what to wear today because you didn't have that much.
I wore the hand-me-downs. My sister was heavy and I was real thin. And by the time they would take them in to fit me, they looked like, I don't know what. It was my own style, believe me.
I had 2 outfits, I remember. And I would wash one at night when I'd come home from school and iron it and wear the other one the next day and then switch around. But I was always washing and ironing.
We didn't have any things like slacks or snow pants, and they didn't have them in those days. So we used to have to wear long underwear under our stockings. And so when we'd leave the house and we'd get around the corner, we'd pull up the stockings, or pull down the stockings, roll up the underpants, and then pull the stockings back down so you couldn't see the white through the darn black.
And I wanted to go to a nice sorority party, and I didn't have the right thing to wear. I took 2 dresses apart and put them together to make a different dress to wear to the party. It had a black skirt. I had no black shoes. I had to wear brown shoes. Nearly killed me. My mother said, "They'll be under the table. Nobody's going to see those brown shoes." What could you do?
In those days, you never really went out on a date the way they do today. Maybe 3 girls would go out for a walk, and the 3 guys would walk behind and try and talk to you. Or we'd go to the Avalon Theater and sit in the balcony, and they'd sit behind us and bring us candy or something like that. We never really went on dates the way the kids do today.
We were pretty clever. We'd meet him. I'll meet you at the Majeska when you wanted to really show off. But you always saw to it that you met him inside, which means they have to pay their own way in.
Mostly dates would be to the motion picture theater or to dancing at the Eagles or at the Wisconsin Roof. That's where dates would be. Yeah, the real highbinders would probably have a car and go out to some country club.
My sister she was 5 years older than I, and she was dating and stuff like that, you know. So she got me acquainted with quite a few nice young men. And we'd go to, it was a dance hall. I can't remember the name of it, but it was in the Bayview area. And over there we'd go dancing and we'd meet the boys, you know. And I remember this one time she was sitting in the front seat of the car with her date, and she fixed up a date for me in the back seat of the car. Well, he got kind of bold and he put his arm around me, and I kind of shivered. And so then he kissed me, and I didn't respond at all because I never kissed a boy before in my life. And he told my sister afterwards, he said, "Jeepers, she's no fun. She doesn't even know how to kiss." I learned how after that.
Well, to say that we liked girls would be an understatement. It was a primary occupation. And, well, you could do almost anything if you didn't get caught. The morality of the day seemed to be that there was out of sight, out of mind, but the penalties for being, for instance, you had to get married. If the girl was pregnant, she had no choice. The family wouldn't allow it, the morality of the day. But dating presented a lot of problems because of the lack of privacy. Back seat of the Ford was nice, but limited. And the entertainments were to go dancing at the Schrader Ballroom when a big band came there, and you get all gussied up, or at the Roof, some other place like that.
There was a lovely ballroom on 19th and Wells called the Colonial, and there was a hostess there. You'd go in there, and she would introduce you to the gentlemen who came, or the fellows who came. And you never danced with anybody unless you were introduced to them. And she saw to it that everybody was on the up and up. Everything was it was very elegant. It was a nice place to go. But the Eagles also had a beautiful ballroom. And the big dance bands used to come there.
We used to go to the Eagles, and then they had open air dancing at Garfield Park on the roof.
There was the Schrader Hotel, of course, which is now the Hilton. We had formal dances there.
I got in there, I was the youngest one in the group. I was only about 16 years old. And I see fellas and women dancing, and I'd see them disappear, and then they'd come back again, and the woman would be with somebody else and disappear, and I finally wanted to know what the heck this was. I was an innocent kid at this time, but I got an education that night.
We were married on the 1st of May, and it happened to be just the first gorgeous day we had that year. The sun was shining, we went to the church, and all I had as attendants was his brother and his wife and my sister.
Our wedding was at St. Paul's Church, and I had 6 bridesmaids.
There was something more important to weddings in those days because they were expected to be more or less permanent.
I didn't get married until I was old enough to know better. And I didn't have children until I was old enough to be a grandmother. So
The solemnity of the ceremony was important. But afterwards, there was an awful lot of polka dancing and beer drinking and yelling and so on.
We had our reception at the Sacred Heart Hall, where his folks had gone to church.
then we went to the Old Town Club that was down on Farwell, where that grocery store is now, and had the reception.
The young couple, more often than not, simply turned around and went back upstairs because that's where they lived with Ma.
By the late 30s, the words Hone and mayor had become synonymous. Daniel Webster Hone had been mayor an unprecedented 24 years.
Dan was a very honest mayor, very good one.
He was mayor for 24 years, and he was an exceptionally good administrator.
But then a fair-haired, blue-eyed boy came singing and smiling into Milwaukee's heart.
My brother Carl was a very popular young man. He was a very fine singer, knew a lot of people, had a great memory.
He was a tall, 6'1" or 2" guy. He was blonde, he had a personality, he could play the piano.
He's a graduate of Marquette University Law School. He worked as an assistant city attorney and was kind of popular.
And turns out my young Carl wanted to run for mayor.
A number of people proposed that he run for mayor, I would suppose, in the late 30s.
And I'll never forget, it was a new girl brought into our coat department to be a salesperson. And she said, "Do you know Carl Zeidler?" And I said, "Yes, I know him very well." And she says, "Oh, he's wonderful." And I said, "Well, you've only been in Milwaukee a few weeks. How did you get to meet him?" Well, she said, "I live at St. Catherine's home." And she said, one morning about 6:30, the doorbell rang, and Sister so-and-so opened the door, and Carl Zeidler was standing there, and he said, "Do you have a piano in the dining room?" And I promised not to talk politics, and I'll lead the girls in song and get them started for the day. And she says, "He was so good, we made him come back a half a dozen times. He's wonderful."
Daniel Hone was a socialist. My brother Carl was a nonpartisan, they called him at the time.
Carl was non-political as far as I could remember.
Well, his philosophy was the best expressed by hats off to the past, coats off to the future. That was his slogan.
Locke and I took over his campaign and wrote every word he ever said in the campaign, and he won.
There was some idea that he got elected largely because he had a smart team of young public relations people.
He beat this old socialist and the last socialist of any importance in the United States, and the whole socialist movement there took a big setback from myself and two no-goods, two nobodies.
Harold Gower and Robert Block were two Brady Street upstarts who headed up Zeidler's public relations. The pranksters coined new political slogans and infused youthful tactics into tired campaign practices. Block contributed stories to Weird Tales magazine and was the future author of Psycho.
We didn't know what we were doing, no. But we invented it, and Bob wrote some wonderful speeches for Carl about the City Hall being a house of mystery, and the chains clanking in the elevators, and the buried plans, and stuff like that. Sheer bunk, but it worked out fine. And we invented a lot of stagecraft. We had a fake City Hall with a tower that came off and paper moss flew out because these old guys didn't know what they were doing either. And somehow it just worked out because of the times and because of the youth movement. The old-time socialists didn't have any idea how to campaign. We were talking about a new Milwaukee and a new whatever it was that Carl had to offer. And we beat old Dan home.
Carl Zeidler was only 32, the youngest chief executive of any large city in the nation when he took office in 1940. The future looked so bright.
And then Carl Zeidler, being a patriot and an idiot in combination, I guess, decided to volunteer in the armed services, and he got onto a armed merchant ship loaded with ammunition and sailed off in the U-boat waters and was never heard from again.
Milwaukee between the wars, the 20s and 30s, two of the most diametrically opposed decades in Milwaukee's history. A time of great promise and prosperity, followed by hardship and depression. Yet through it all, the close-knit bonds formed in Milwaukee's ethnic neighborhoods gave the city its strength and character to face the new challenges and threat of a Second World War.